Good afternoon. My name is Shaz Akram, founder of Her Pivot, a mentorship platform supporting women through often challenging journeys of career transitions. Her Pivot empowers mid-career and executive-level women from diverse backgrounds to share their stories, challenges, and triumphs. By creating a space where women's voices are heard and valued, Her Pivot provides critical guidance and encouragement for women navigating leadership and career changes. I'm delighted to welcome an exceptional leader, internationalist, and dear friend, Dr. Fanta Aw, to Her Pivot. Originally from Mali, Dr. Aw has lived in both East and West Africa, as well as the United States, gaining a broad and diverse cultural perspective. Her passion for global experiences has led her to explore more than 60 countries. Her knowledge has been acknowledged by major global media outlets and serves on several boards nationally and internationally. With that, I welcome you, Fanta.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Shaz. It's always great to see you. And also I want to say first and foremost, congratulations on your platform, Her Pivot. I love the name because I think the name signifies so much. And we don't have enough of those spaces, particularly for women to come together. And having known you for the time that I've known you, I know how important mentorship is to you and how near and dear it is to your heart. So I'm humbled to be here today with you, really.
Oh, we are delighted to have you on Her Pivot. And we have a lot of women are struggling, particularly in the mid to senior level, where they, biases like ageism and just not having a good mentor to transition them to the next stage in their careers sort of pushed me to create this platform. And it's because of mentors, amazing mentors like you, that we have the potential of using this platform effectively for other women. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and feel free to add whatever you would like to add to your answer. It could be long, it could be short, no problem. What inspires you to work within the field of higher education?
Well, I think what inspires me and what inspires a lot of people like yourselves and others, and that is the knowing that we have a responsibility to a generation that is coming after us, and that generation that's coming after us and that it has aspirations and goals and dreams like we've had, want to be able to be in a world that they feel is in need of a lot of things, right? It's this idea that they're going and getting an education, but it's not just for an education's sake, it's what they do with that education. And so what inspires me is knowing that we have a social responsibility to the world in which we live, that we would live in a very interdependent world, and that what happens in one place has implications for other places. So how we educate this generation and the next generation of leaders to be empathetic, to be compassionate, to care, to do better and be better is something that really matters to me on lots of levels. And I do believe that as one who's been the product of international education, that this form of education can be transformative. And I want to make sure that as many students as we can have that opportunity, because we know that there's a lot of talent all around the world that we come from. We know there's so much talent there. And often I say what is missing is our opportunities. So we have an opportunity gap problem. And I'm hoping that through my work in small ways, I can help with that opportunity gap issue, and that we can provide this kind of education to as many students around the world that we can. I wake up every day thinking about that, and it is what really inspires me to do the work that I do.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. In what ways is professional work within higher ed changing?
I think the work is changing a lot. I think, we've seen so many headwinds and so many changes in our field and in our profession. We're seeing a lot of turnover in some areas. We're not seeing the same level of sort of, what I would say, longevity that we've seen in our field. And so with that, it's historical memories that is going. It's the historical knowledge that is leaving the field. And there are a lot of people who I think are asking themselves the questions of whether or not they should remain in the field to some extent. And my answer to them is we need to help them understand that this is a field for them, and that more than that, that this is a field where there's a lot of work to be done, and we need smart, engaged people to be involved in this work. So between the turnover, between so much change, whether it's social, political, economic, and so forth, that's happening in the world that we're in, we're seeing a lot of changes. And so it's important for us to continue to renew our commitment to this area of work. And for those of us who've been in the field 30, 40 years, we still have something to offer this field, while at the same time creating space for a new generation to step in, so that we know that the mental is here and that we are in many ways preparing the next generation of international educators as we move forward as well.
So think about some of the challenges you have faced in your career, right? Can you give me an example of something that might count as one of the biggest challenges you faced? I will just extend this a bit, give an example. As an immigrant and a woman of color that has reached levels of success in higher education, I'm sure you have encountered some unique challenges that go beyond, the ceilings, the so-called ceilings we've invisibly placed. So can you speak to some of those experiences and how you overcame them?
Yeah. No, so I think there's quite a few challenges along the way. I think when you come to a place as an immigrant, how immigrants are received or how people sort of think about them within society is something that we find in the workplace. I think the workplace is not divorced from the larger society. I think when you're a woman, and you add that as well, I think those components do come in. And also, I think for many of us, we came into the field, perhaps, I was in my 20s when I came into the field. So this need to, in many ways, where you were almost asked to prove yourself in many ways for the roles and responsibilities that you were given, was something that you had to be aware of. And what I learned along the way, with the struggles and the challenges, is really this idea of you have mentors and you have sponsors, right? And I think it's important to understand that you need both of those. You need the mentors that pave the way, that you look up to, that you want to emulate in terms of the strength that they bring to the field and the values that they bring to the field. But you also need those sponsors who open doors. And in opening doors, you know that it's not enough that the doors be open. You want to make sure that you get through, and that in getting through, you stay in the ways that you know it needs to happen. And so I've had to navigate both of those, and I've been incredibly fortunate, Shaz, along the way, that I have found some key mentors, and also just at least one or two key sponsors. Um, and I've always said that it's not enough that there's folks who open the door. You know that you have to earn it, and it's the case for women in particular, that all too often we often feel like we have to be 150% prepared. you know it's a case that men, if they have 80% or 70% or even 60% of the qualifications, they'll throw their name in the hat. For we as women, we often feel you have to have 150% to feel confident to throw your name in the hat. And I know that I've gone through that in a way that many other women have. And along the way, what I've said to other women is 100% is more than enough, and be okay with 80%, knowing that that is more than enough, in order to kind of get yourself out there. And that's been some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. Also, the other piece that I have encountered and that I've learned along the way is you have to have some trusted people around you. You have to find at least two or three people that you trust in many ways, I say, with your life. And in trusting them with your life, that you can share your challenges, your struggles, with them, and with the understanding that it is okay to be vulnerable. And that in being vulnerable with them and in trusting them, that's also how you can really, in many ways, have that reality check that you need, right? And that I think that's another important thing that I've learned along the way, and that I pass on to a lot of folks. I'm like, if I can be part of that kitchen cabinet for you, count on me to do that, because I know how important it is. Men do an exceptional job of that. And I think as women, those are things that I think we can learn. And at the same time, I've also come to learn that in taking on these roles of responsibilities, increasingly so, being true to who you are and staying grounded in your values is so important. Because I think all too often there's this pressure to become someone else. And I've always said, I only know how to be me. And in being me, far from perfect, but I'm very content with where I am in my life. And I feel secure enough in who I am to know the values that I bring to the table. And it's very important to not compromise those along the way, because you have to be able to stand by that no matter what. And I think that's another important component of one of the things that I've learned is staying true to who you are, and the authenticity of it is really quite important, because there's a lot of pressure to conform to other norms and other things. Of course, we all have the opportunity to learn and grow. And you have to be curious in life. You have to want to learn in life. You have to be willing to grow, and also just own when you've made mistakes. That's what it means to be human. In the process, do not lose who you are, because that's going to serve you well to be yourself and to stay centered in who you are.
Wow, that is a powerful lesson. Sponsors are very important in our life. Thank you. In your opinion, what are the most pressing issues educational institutions face globally today? Why? And then the second part of this question is, why is it important for women to be involved in resolving these issues? And I'll just say, because, it's an increasingly polarized world that is directly affecting international education and cultural exchanges, and women are more adversely affected due to the lack of, obviously mobility, opportunities, equality, and lack of financial strength. So what do you think about that?
Yeah. No, I think this is a really important question that you're asking. There are so many challenges that it's easy to be overwhelmed by so much of what is out there. And I would put it in a couple of categories. One is really going back to this opportunity gap again. I think it's safe to say, particularly when it comes to higher education, that there's some skepticism about the value of higher education, because there's so many people who feel like they've been left behind and really don't feel like higher education is bringing them in, either because of issues of affordability or issues of, as women who, particularly with women who may have to, have raised their families, make sure that there's bread on the table and all of that. Higher education needs to really be thinking about the big tent. And it's this idea that we need to make sure that we don't leave people behind, and that we need to uplift as many people, and that the goal and objective of higher education, when it does its work well, is to better the lives of everyday people. And that education is what provides that social mobility that often people need in order to have bigger aspirations and to live better lives, but also as a result can have better health outcomes, right? Can have, income that allows them to be able to meet the needs of their families, the needs of their communities, and so forth. And I think one thing that we've learned in particular about women is that women, whenever have acquired education, we've seen time and time again from all of the different indicators that the benefits is outgrows women. It's more than the benefits to women. It's a benefit to the community. It's a benefit to society writ large. So it is true that investing in women is a very important investment in community and society. And so when we're not offering these opportunities at the rate that is needed for women, it is society as a whole that is losing, in addition to individual women and their families. And that is one of the things that I always keep in mind. And as I think about the challenges, whether it's peace, that is an issue, that there is such, a shortage of peace in our world right now. Whether we think about climate change disproportionately affects women and underprivileged, communities. You can name any of these major issues that we're looking at. You see that women are very much at the crossroad of those things, both in the solutions and the ones who are often cut out from it. And so we have to step back and we have to think about the role of women in these areas and why it is such an important investment for us to make.
Very well said. We're continuing that conversation we saw a challenging time in prominent institutions this past year due to nationwide protests, due to the obviously Israel-Hamas conflict. Prominent women presidents were forced out of their roles. We saw the world, this kind of interesting picture. We saw the world of philanthropy, freedom of speech, advocacy, and independent institutions collide in a very, very public way. So with that said, how can we increase representation of women in the top educational institutions after what has been going on?
I think what we saw there is an indictment on society as a whole, right? And I think it's a sobering reminder that even as women, and there's so few of us to begin with, but even as women get to the higher echelons of roles and responsibilities within institutions, that they're never really safe in those roles. And that we saw how they become very vulnerable to the wave of blame game, the wave of sort of, backlash, the wave of polarization, how easy it is to sacrifice. I think women in this way, right? We saw quite a bit of that. And I think the lesson to be learned there is it is not enough to ascend to those positions. When we ascend to those positions, we need to know that the systems that is in place is really a system that is there to support, not just supporting the good times, but supporting in the hardest of times. And I think this is where women are still very vulnerable. The numbers are small to begin with, but with the small numbers that are there, it is not yet secure. And we saw quite a bit of that. So I think institutions, if they want to be honest with themselves, and if we all want to be honest with ourselves, we do have double standards, and those standards become glaring in the most challenging of time. And for the women who, step down, many times they step down to also in many ways preserve themselves. And I think that's the other piece that as women, we do remember is that you come to a place in a time where you have to make those very difficult choices. They're never easy. They're often very difficult choices, but you have to remember to also make the choices that work for you. And self-preservation is an important part of that. And so this is one of the things that I see. And I think we have ways to go for we as a society, for institutions, for systems to really be systems that support and uplift rather than systems that in many ways break you down.
So, well said, but how do you see women evolving in this sector, U.S. higher educational sector in future?
I think the way we need to get at that, Shaz, is that, if you're women, for example, and president's role and everything else, it's not enough. What is the representation on your board? Right? I think that's important. What's the representation of your leadership team that surrounds you, right? I think we need to be looking at that representation at all different levels and strata of our institutions and communities, right? Because ultimately, if you're there and there's not representation in these other areas where there's a level of sensibilities to these issues, then you're going to find yourself in many ways when it's time to sacrifice, who has to be sacrificed. And I think that's one very important lesson. It doesn't mean that simply because you have a board that is all women, that it means that they're going to necessarily support women. We have to also remember that with those boards, women have to support women. Not just because, but because it's actually quite important to uplift each other. And this is why we do mentorship. This is why we are sponsors, because we understand that we have an obligation in many ways to pay it forward. And that is one of the things that I'm often reminded of, right? So I couldn't help but ask myself when I saw what I was seeing in some of the institutions, what is the representation in the makeup of their board, right? What is the representation and makeup of the folks who are around them and so forth? And how do they empower each other so that when it's time to make these tough decisions, you know that you're in it together is an important component of the work that needs to happen. It's representation, but in that representation has to be equity and access and feeling empowered to make the right decisions.
And that is, in my experience, one of the challenges women face
Yes.
is supporting each other.
Yes.
It's not as strong as it should be.
Yes. I think there's more work that can be done in that space because we've seen the power that can be harnessed and the influence that can be harnessed when we support each other. And I've always said, you know what? For for any of us to be able to rise up, we must all rise up together.
Very well said. Very well said. So I'll segue to our next question. Can you share successful policies, practices, or firsthand experiences that have effectively promoted gender equality and heightened female participation in leadership? And you've said a lot about that, but anything else you would like to add with the
Yeah,
gender equality aspect?
yeah, no. I think the piece that comes up for me as I think about policy pieces around the gender equality piece is I think our ability to connect this, the importance of those policies and work to universal values and universal principles, I think actually matters. And that is that it has been my experience when I was heading our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. It became very clear to me that if we created the policies, the practices, and sort of the processes that, in many ways help women advance, that in fact, those same systems and practices could be applied to other marginalized groups. Because it really becomes, in many ways, an important framework for how you can really achieve greater equity. Just thinking about things like women who feel like they have to choose between having a family and work. When you know that the important piece of society is family is a very important component of society, right? How we raise our children should matter to all of us as a society. So the fact that women often felt that they had to make those very difficult choices and there weren't policies in place that supported women who, for example, needed to take time to go have a family and be able to raise their children, but then be able to come back into the workplace. These are the kinds of systems, of practices that really hold all of us back. And
Yeah.
there should be shared responsibility from a society perspective. And so I give that as an example of an area of policy of how do we help employers, how do we help institutions writ large understand that to do that is not to step back or that a woman is not interested in the work, is that we all benefit from strong families.
And the diversity our backgrounds bring.
Of backgrounds, absolutely.
Taking a 2-year gap to
Yes,
raise a child. I mean,
yes,
unfortunately, the woman is the
is
homemaker and the mother
yes,
of the children and has to
absolutely
raise them. And so
yes,
she ends up being the sacrifice of
right,
her
right.
career as the sacrifice.
Right. And so we need to really open up our minds to that. And we need to have policies that in many ways support those types of choices because society writ large benefits from those if we're to think in a holistic way.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. So you have worked for a top institution, American University, for over 30 years. You pivoted to nonprofit leadership. Can you tell me about your time and work there and pivoting to the nonprofit sector? I mean, it's, in a way, you left a comfortable, well-respected, very high-level position and came to NAFSA. NAFSA is obviously over 75 years old, very well established, but a different world. How would you advise other women in higher ed to make, their successful pivots?
So
And,
that's a
and from education to nonprofit, nonprofit to education sort of scenario.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good question and it's an important question. I love my time at American University. I often say that it's the place where I find my voice and where I find my purpose. But truthfully, also, I realized that while I was at American University, one of the other gifts that I was given is the ability to be connected to a larger world, professional world, and that was NAFSA. So those two worlds, in some ways, always came together and we're always on the same journey, right? At all different points in times of my time at American University. And I don't think that that was necessarily by accident. I think because I was in international education and was working on a campus, there was a symbiotic relationship between those two areas. So I would be one to say, Shaz, that I was very fortunate to have been given the opportunity to do the kind of work that I did. I learned a lot, had the opportunity to test out many different things and felt supported in doing so. And when I decided to make the pivot, from being in a university setting where, like you said, I was comfortable. 30 years, I knew the people, I knew the environment, I knew the setting, I knew all of the different sort of key players. To come to a place like NAFSA that I knew as a member, primarily and as a member leader, etc., this was a big change. And also a change at a time where I'm in my sort of later 50s, right? That I'm making this change as well. And there were really two things that motivated me to make this change. And that was one, I've always said, and I say this often to people when they're asking me, if you have one advice as you think about career change, what should I think about? I'm like, first and foremost, think about releasing your fears, right? A lot of times, understandably so, we hold ourselves back because we're afraid. We want certainty in a way, but nothing is certain in life. I would say even tomorrow is never promised, right? So we have to be willing to kind of sit with that discomfort of the unknown and become comfortable with that understanding of the unknown. But if you also believe that you're meant to be in the places that you're meant to be in, and that it's for a purpose and a reason, then you come to the conclusion that when change happens, that it's not by accident. So that's my overall philosophy about life. And I tend to live my life a lot with that philosophy that we all have gifts and talents. And those gifts and talents will find ourselves in the places where we're meant to be at the time that we're meant to be. And that is the larger universe that drives that. That's my overall philosophy. So I knew in my heart when it was time for that pivot. I didn't know exactly where it was going to be, but I knew that it was time for that pivot. And I didn't, and then the opportunity came up, and the opportunity came up to apply for this position. And when I looked at the position description and everything else and so forth, I thought, you know what? I think this is something that I know I'm passionate about. I know I'm passionate about it. And I think that this is something that I'm ready for at this point. But also understanding that there's a process. It may or may not happen. And if it was to happen, then I was meant to be in this place at this time. And that's the philosophy piece. So one is release your fears. Two, have faith that you're going to be in the places where you're meant to be at the time that you're meant to be. You can't just be complacent about that. You have to be willing to be open to the possibilities and the opportunities, and to not be afraid of testing out the waters, knowing and allowing it to go in the direction that it needs to go into. Certainly, you're going to have to work very hard at what you do. You're going to have to face challenges in the things that you need to be facing with. But you know that if that is what you're supposed to do, you're going to do the best that you can. And that is going to be more than enough if you're doing the best that you can. And that's the other thing that I always remind folks. It doesn't mean that you're not going to make mistakes along the way. You're human. But also, I always say the other thing for women in particular is have grace. Have grace for yourself.
Yeah. Well said. But, I'll add one more thing that you didn't touch on just here, but you served on the board of NAFSA.
Yes.
And serving on boards or volunteering in various professional communities and mentoring others really brings you up the ladder. I mean, it gives you skills because it exposes you to a room full of professionals. You
Absolutely.
learn so much. And then when you also know about the organization, and
Yes.
that really helps because you've built your credibility, people know
Yeah.
your reputation. And when your name comes up, they are like, oh, yes, this is our candidate, because they have already sort of through your volunteer and through working with you, know your personality. And so that is a big thing women should consider as they're building out their careers, volunteering.
And thank you, Shaz, for really raising that, because you're absolutely correct. When these opportunities come, they come because in some ways there's a connection point, right? And that connection point is realizing the importance of being of service. And I think whenever we can make time, we have to make time to volunteer. We have to make time to be part of the communities that we care about. We have to give the time because we know that that's important. And so I do agree with you that we cannot underestimate the importance of volunteering, the importance of being present in spaces and places and being of service. Absolutely important part of who we should always aspire to be. And that is one of the things that I think is absolutely key. And for all of us who are in the field, this piece about the importance of volunteering is something that we take very seriously because that is how you can be of service to your field and to your community.
Absolutely. So one question on resources and opportunities.
Mhm.
Can you share any resources or opportunities for professional development, skill building that women can take advantage of to enhance their qualifications for leadership roles, especially in higher education and the nonprofit world?
Yeah, no, I think there are a couple of things, resources that I think come to mind. One is that, especially now with the advance of virtual spaces that are available, I often say that you find that there's a lot of events and programs that are taking place routinely that are around leadership, right? Leadership qualities, leadership, abilities, leadership acumen. And so I recommend that women really sort of, and men and everybody takes advantage of those resources that are available, that are particularly available virtually. In addition, it's really important in many ways to stay connected to your field and to your profession. In my case, it happened to be, like I said, it was NAFSA. And so being a member of NAFSA was an important investment that I made and that after my institution made as well. But then I could take advantage of some of the leadership opportunities that came up, whether it was volunteering. There's a lot of call for leadership opportunities. So volunteering for those and raising your hand is a very important one to do as well. And so those are things that I think are quite important. And then we are lifelong learners. And as lifelong learners, it means that we're constantly learning, retooling, rescaling, and so forth. So finding courses that you can take where you don't have to worry finally for about grades and everything else, but that you can really learn just for the fun of learning. I think that becomes important. So there's a lot of peer-to-peer engagement and peer-to-peer learning opportunities that come up through the associations and the organizations that we belong to that I think are quite important. And then depending on where you're living, find out about the kind of community engagement things that you can do and how you can get involved, whether it's think tanks that are having events and programs, and more of them slowly are doing more around women and leadership. Take advantage of those things as they become available to you. I think that's an important piece of advice that I have. And then lastly, you know, reach out to somebody that you're curious about learning more from for an informational conversation to learn more about how they've come to what they've come to, what has it taken to do so. And I've always said for many of us who are in the field, we say yes. And if we're not in a position to do it, we will refer you to somebody else who can help answer those questions. And so leverage that network that's available to you to develop personally and professionally. I think that's a really important piece of it. So the resources around membership in organization and association, leveraging the peer-to-peer network that's available, um, taking advantage of the virtual sort of leadership things that are there for you and so forth, and then literally, leveraging the network that exists and reach out to at least someone that you are curious about and that you want to learn more from. You may not always get a yes answer, but you won't know till you try.
So we come to our last question, reflecting on your extraordinary career in international education, public policy, and immigration. The list of words is long, but I focus on these three because I think they're the core in the times we're living. What have been your most challenging lessons and gratifying moments?
The most challenging lesson for people who've known me for a very long time, Chaz, is I've learned to be patient. I would say that I was one of those folks who just impatience was probably a major trait. And I've learned over this period of time that it actually matters to be patient and to understand, particularly when you're talking about advocacy and public policy, that it is a marathon and it's not a sprint, and that you should never relent. And that's one of the things that I've learned and I've come to appreciate over a period of time, just as an example of one of those things that I've learned along the way. The other thing that I've learned along the way is that we should never underestimate the role and importance of being connected to community, and that is what uplifts us. It is what nourishes us in many ways, nourishes our soul in many ways, and it is where we really find comfort and strength. And that community comes in lots of different forms. And I've been incredibly fortunate that over my career, I've really had a community of sisterhood. And these have been women from so many different parts of the world, but we share so much more in common than we're different. And knowing that and being able to have that has been a tremendous privilege, and one that I don't take for granted. And it's been the sort of sisterhood that has supported me in the most challenging of times, because you realize that you're not alone, and you realize that you're part of something bigger and greater than yourself. So that's one of the other things and lessons that I've learned along the way from a professional and a personal standpoint. And then lastly, I go back to where I started, which is do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. If you are walking in your own light, and if you're remaining centered on what you know matters most, don't be afraid. There's always this piece of, you want to be able to, at the end of your time on this earth, you want to be able to look back and say to yourself, certainty, that you've done the best that you could with what you had, and that in small ways you've made a difference. That to me is the legacy that I want to be able to leave when I leave this earth, is knowing that in small ways I did the best that I could and made a small difference on this earth.
Wow, you've been an inspiration to me, Fanta, and a mentor and a dear friend. And I've learned so much from you. And NAFSA is very lucky to have you, actually. Um, Leadership for this community at this juncture, like you, is incredibly, it's an incredible blessing for the international education community. So one of these are the few takeaway points from this conversation today. And for women who are aspiring to learn and utilize some of these skills, you talked about sponsorship, which is very important. You talked about mentorship. You talked about staying true to yourself, volunteering on boards, community service. And then the last is do not be afraid and believe in yourself. And, I find in my conversations with many women as a career coach myself, I find imposter syndrome coming up a lot. And a lot of fear keeps intelligent, brilliant women back because they are second guessing themselves. And if we as a community come together, like you mentioned, and you talked very extensively about that community of the sisterhood and women supporting each other and all of us pulling each other, I think that we could be in a better position to be where we should be in leadership roles, around the 50-50, percent. Representation. It's incredible how
Yes,
many women there
yes,
are, and they're
yes,
not even 20% in those top
yes,
leadership roles. And
yes,
institutions, we see the same with the
yes,
presidents
yes.
at various institutions of higher ed. So thank you so much for your time. This has been wonderful. I've learned so much from you. I'm sure other women will find this useful and useful to utilize some of the skills and resources you've shared. We look forward to another conversation with you in the future.
Well, thank you, Shaz. And also, let me just finish by thanking you, because I've known you for quite a while, and I know how much you have done and continue to do in this field and on behalf of so many people. And I think it's a powerful reminder that this work, we never do it alone, we do it together. And I'm reminded of that every single day. And so I do want to take a minute and thank you for your leadership and for your steadfast commitment to what is very important. And I agree with you 100% that we can do more when you look at the statistics. And I wanted to really leave all of us knowing and understanding that we are not powerless, that there are lots of systems and forces that make it challenging, but we are not powerless. And every single one of us have the ability to do our small part And if we add up these small parts in the collective, it can be a lot. And so I want to make sure that for the folks who are listening today, to remember that and to really take comfort in that.
Thank you, Fanta. Thank you so much for being on Her Pivot today. Thank you.
Thank you. You take good care.